Humans can speak. The chimpanzee and the gorilla have lungs like ours, a tongue like ours, and neither of them ever will. The difference sits lower, in the throat you are breathing through right now. You swallowed a moment ago without noticing. A flap of cartilage folded over your windpipe and your breathing stopped. For nearly every mammal, that is safe. For you, it is not. Your air and your food cross in an open space no chimpanzee has. It is why food goes the wrong way, and researchers think it is also why you have a voice at all. Tonight, you are lying in the dark, breathing through a throat that traded safety for sound. So why can a person speak when an animal built almost the same never will? You are lying still in the dark, and a moment ago your throat did something you never asked it to do. Saliva had been gathering quietly at the back of your tongue, the way it gathers all day and all night, and once there was enough of it, a swallow began without you. The middle of your tongue pressed up against the roof of your mouth and rolled backward like a slow wave. The soft palate, that curtain of tissue hanging at the back of the roof, lifted and sealed off the passage to your nose. Your larynx, the small hard box you can feel at the front of your neck, rose about 2 centimeters, and a flap of cartilage called the epiglottis tipped down over the opening of your windpipe the way a lid tips down onto a jar. For roughly 1 second, you stopped breathing. The saliva slid past the closed lid into the tube behind it, the tube that carries food, and then the larynx dropped, the lid lifted, and the air came back. None of it reached you. By most estimates, a person swallows something in the range of 600 times a day, and around 50 of those swallows happen during sleep, which means that tonight, while you drift, your breathing will halt and restart dozens of times without your knowing, each halt lasting about as long as a heartbeat, each one opening and closing a door in front of your lungs. Every mammal alive has to solve the same problem, because air and food come in through the same opening in the face and have to be sorted out somewhere further in. Most mammals sort it high and far forward, in a place where the two passages barely share any room at all. Your body sorts it low, in a chamber behind your tongue that is taller and more open than the same chamber in any other ape. The chamber has a name, the pharynx, and it is the only place in your entire body where the road to your lungs and the road to your stomach cross over each other. Everything you have ever eaten has passed within a centimetre of the opening to your lungs. You were not born this way. A newborn baby carries its larynx very high in the throat, high enough that the upper rim of it pushes past the soft palate and locks into the passage coming down from the nose, so that air runs in a nearly sealed tube from nostril to lung without ever entering the mouth at all. Milk goes around it. The two streams pass each other on separate sides of that raised rim, which is why an infant can nurse and breathe in the same continuous motion, minute after minute, without lifting its mouth away and without choking. You could do that once. Then the shape began to change. Over the first months and years of your life, the larynx settled down the neck, the pharynx above it lengthened into open space, and the seal came apart. Researchers still argue over how quickly this happens and how much of it is unique to us, but the outline is not in dispute. The arrangement you were born with is the arrangement that most mammals keep for the whole of their lives. You had it. And you lost it. And you lost it before you had said a single word. Nobody asked you. The payment went out before you knew what was being bought. Somewhere in a forest in Uganda tonight, there is a chimpanzee asleep in a nest of folded branches, and its throat is still built the way yours was in the first weeks of your life, or close to it. Its larynx rides high. Its face runs long and forward, so the tongue lies mostly flat inside the mouth rather than curving down into the neck. When that chimpanzee wakes and eats figs in the morning, the food will travel back over a shorter and shallower crossing than the one in your throat, and the gap between its airway and its foodway will be smaller and better guarded. Field researchers who have watched wild chimpanzees for decades report that choking on food is a rare event among them. Rare enough that it is not something observers write much about. It is worth being careful here, because rare is not the same as impossible, and no animal is fully safe from its own dinner. But the difference in scale is real, and the reason for it sits in the geometry. What moved, in the human line, was not only the larynx sliding down. The face itself flattened, the long snout of an ape jaw pulled back under the brain case. The row of teeth shortened, and the tongue, which had always been a flat muscle lying in a long mouth, had nowhere left to lie. So the back third of it turned downward into the throat, and it became something no other animal's tongue is. It became a wall. The rear surface of your tongue forms the front wall of that open chamber above your larynx, and it can push forward and back, up and down, inside a space that is roughly as tall as it is long. That shape, and the muscle that can reshape it a few hundred times a minute, is what turns a plain column of breath into a vowel. It is also what puts the crossing where it is. The tongue that lets you say your own name is the same tongue that has been moved into the path of your food. Consider what a body has to give up to make that trade, and the giving up is not abstract. Sit with a gorilla for a while, in a zoo enclosure or in the mountain forests of Central Africa, and you will see an animal that is built at an enormous scale and yet handles the joining of air and food with far less risk than you do. An infant gorilla clings to its mother's chest and feeds for long stretches without ever breaking to breathe, and unlike you, it does not grow out of that. Its hyoid bone, the small horseshoe of bone that hangs at the top of the throat and holds the whole apparatus in place, is shaped differently from yours, with a hollow chamber in the front that your hyoid does not have. Your hyoid is a plain arch, and it is the only bone in your body that does not touch another bone anywhere. It floats, slung in muscle, and it rides upward every time you swallow. Put 2 fingers on the front of your neck and swallow now, and you will feel it go, a hard little arch travelling up and then back down. In 1983, at Kibra Cave on Mount Carmel in Israel, archaeologists lifted a hyoid bone out of a Neanderthal burial that had been lying there for roughly 60,000 years, and it looked essentially like the one under your fingers. The evidence suggests the throat had already taken this shape long before our own species was the only one carrying it around. That is what the arrangement gives. Now, the other side of it. Somewhere in your life you have felt a mouthful go the wrong way, and the response was immediate and total. A cough that came from below the ribs, eyes watering, the whole body bending forward, everything else in your mind cancelled for 4 or 5 seconds while the airway fought to clear itself. That reflex is not an accident, and it is not a flaw. It is a guard posted at a doorway that other animals do not have to guard nearly as carefully, and it fires because the consequence of failure is severe. Health authorities in the United States record on the order of 5,000 deaths a year from choking on food and other objects, and it ranks among the leading causes of accidental death in very young children and in the elderly, at the 2 ends of life when the muscles that lift the larynx are either not yet coordinated or no longer strong. No other animal on this planet has built an emergency maneuver for choking, taught it in classrooms and printed it on restaurant walls, because no other animal needed one. The crossing in your throat is guarded by reflexes that work almost all of the time, and almost is the word that carries the weight. There is a further cost that arrives quietly, and it arrives at night. The open chamber above your larynx has soft walls. It is held apart not by bone or by rings of cartilage, but by muscle tone, by a gentle, constant pull from the tissues around it, and that tone drops when you lie down and drops further when you fall asleep. Tonight, in the hours after you stop hearing this, the walls of that chamber will narrow. The tongue will settle back toward the space it once helped to open. For most people, the narrowing is mild and passes unnoticed, and for a great many it is enough to produce sound, the low, rough noise of tissue vibrating in a channel that has become too small for the air trying to move through it. A chimpanzee in its nest of branches does not make that noise, or makes it far less, because the channel in its throat is shorter and its walls are held in a tighter arrangement. The same night is passing over both bodies. Only one of them is breathing through a corridor that has to be actively held open. This is the price, and the strange part is that it is being paid right now, in the quiet, in a body that is not doing anything at all except lying there and staying alive. The tongue that will not be used for a word until morning is still the thing that narrowed your airway. The chamber that is closing slightly as you relax is the same chamber that shapes every vowel you have ever said to anyone. And it would all seem like a simple bad bargain, a lot given up for something you could arguably live without, except that the animals which never made this trade are not living in some safer version of the same life. They live in a different one. There is an animal that has spent the last several thousand years lying near sleeping humans, close enough to hear every word spoken in the house, and its throat solved the whole problem in a way that leaves it free to swallow a piece of meat almost the size of its own windpipe, without breaking its breathing for even a moment. It has heard human voices its entire evolutionary recent history. It has never once been able to answer. Think back to the last meal you ate with other people at the table. You were in the middle of saying something, you lifted a forkful, and before the food could go down you had to stop. Not politely, not by choice. The sentence broke off, the swallow took its second, and only then did the words start again. Everyone at that table did the same thing all evening, dozens of times, and nobody noticed, because a human conversation over food is built around a rhythm of small silences that nobody planned. If someone had made you laugh at exactly the wrong moment, the whole arrangement would have failed at once, and you would have spent the next half-minute bent over and coughing while the table waited. Speaking and eating run through the same narrow passage in your body, and the passage can only serve one of them at a time. Underneath that table, in a great many houses on this planet tonight, there is an animal that has no such rule. Set a bowl of food down in front of a dog of average size and it will be gone in well under a minute. The dog will not chew most of it. Its back teeth are shaped for shearing rather than grinding, so it breaks food into pieces roughly the size of a walnut and sends them down whole, one after another, at a speed that would put a person in an emergency room. While it does this, its breathing barely changes. It can lift its head, take a breath through its nose, drop back to the bowl and keep swallowing, and the two streams never argue with each other, because in that animal they are not sharing the same room. The larynx of a dog sits high in the throat, and its epiglottis, the same flap of cartilage that folds down in your neck, is long enough to reach up behind the soft palate and rest inside the opening that comes down from the nose. The airway and the nasal passage lock together into a single continuous tube. Food and water do not cross that tube. They run around it, down two shallow gutters on either side, and slip into the food pipe behind. A dog eating with its nose free is breathing the entire time. What is happening in that throat is closer to what was happening in yours during your first weeks of life than to anything happening in your throat now. The dog kept the arrangement, you did not. There is a second piece of engineering in that neck worth knowing about, because it explains something you may have watched a dog do without understanding it. The tube that carries food from a dog's throat to its stomach is made of striated muscle along its entire length, the same kind of fast, powerfully contracting muscle that moves your arms. Yours is not. The upper portion of your food pipe is striated, and then, roughly a third of the way down, it changes over to smooth muscle, the slow, involuntary kind that runs your gut, and from there the food is no longer under any control you could exercise even if you wanted to. A dog's food pipe stays fast and stays partly under its command all the way down, which is why a dog can bring a meal back up on purpose without being sick. Wolves have used that ability for a very long time. An adult returns to the den after a hunt, the pups crowd its face, and it delivers a meal it swallowed whole an hour earlier and several kilometers away. The whole throat of that animal is built as a one-way street that can, when needed, run backwards. Now add heat to it. On a warm afternoon, a dog can move air in and out at somewhere between 200 and 400 breaths a minute, shallow and fast, tongue out, saliva running freely across it. Researchers describe this as a resonant motion, the airway rocking at its own natural frequency so that very little muscular effort is required to sustain it, and it can go on for a long time. Consider what that means for a throat. Air is rushing through the passage hundreds of times a minute, the mouth is flooded with saliva, and the whole system is running at a rate your own throat could not tolerate for 30 seconds, and still nothing goes down the wrong way. The panting dog is not fighting its own anatomy, it is using it. Watch the same animal drink and the point repeats itself. High-speed film has shown that a dog does not scoop water the way we assume. It flicks the tip of its tongue backward, pulls a slender column of water up into the air behind it, and closes its jaws around the column 3 or 4 times a second, and it keeps breathing through all of it. Water is being thrown into the back of a mouth several times a second, next to an airway, without incident. Your throat cannot be run that way at all. Breathe fast through your mouth for even a short while, and the back of it dries, the swallow reflex starts misfiring, and the tissue that should stay wet begins to stick. This is worth pausing on, because it is the shape of the whole comparison. The dog is not tougher than you. Its throat has simply never been asked to do 2 jobs in the same space. A dog can also make sound with food in its mouth, which you cannot. Stand near a dog that is guarding a bone, and it will produce a long, low growl with the bone still held between its teeth and its jaw clamped, and the sound loses nothing. Try to say a clear sentence with a mouthful of bread, and what comes out is mush, because your consonants are shaped by the same tongue, the same palate, and the same soft chamber that the bread is sitting in. The dog's growl is generated below all of that, in the larynx, and shaped very little by the mouth above it, so the mouth is free to be full. Your voice is shaped almost entirely by the mouth above it, so your mouth has to be empty. The same evening passes over both bodies in that room. One of them eats and breathes and makes noise in whatever order it likes. The other has to take turns with itself. Health authorities in the United States record on the order of 5,000 deaths a year from choking, and the vast majority of the animals sleeping in those same houses will never face that risk in any serious way at all. There is one more thing in your own neck worth naming, because it is the place where this most often goes wrong in people. Those two shallow gutters that carry food around a dog's larynx exist in you as well, on either side of the voice box, and doctors call them the piriform recesses. In your throat they are wider and more exposed, and they are where a thin fishbone or a fragment of shell lodges when a meal goes badly. Ear, nose, and throat departments remove foreign bodies from that exact pocket routinely. A dog has the same pockets and almost never needs them cleared. There is one exception, and it did not come from nature. Genetic and archaeological work suggests dogs have been living alongside people for at least 15,000 years, and some estimates push it considerably further back, which means this animal has been lying near sleeping humans since before farming, before writing, before any city existed. For nearly all of that time its throat was the throat of a wolf. Then, over the last 2 centuries or so, people took certain dogs and bred them for a flatter and flatter face, until the muzzle of a pug or a bulldog had been pulled back to a fraction of the length a wolf carries. The bone shortened quickly. The soft tissue inside did not. The tongue stayed roughly the size it had been, the soft palate stayed roughly as long, the folds and cushions of the throat kept their old dimensions, and all of it was pushed back into a space that had been shortened around it. Veterinarians have a name for what follows. The soft palate hangs too far back and flaps into the airway. The nostrils narrow. The walls of the throat collapse inward on each breath. Dogs with these faces overheat easily, tire on short walks, and cannot always cool themselves properly, because the panting system depends on air moving freely through a passage that is now crowded. And at night they snore. Some of them sleep with their heads propped up or their chins hooked over something, because lying flat lets the tongue settle back into a space that no longer has room for it. If you have ever shared a room with a bulldog, you have heard it, that low broken sound rising and catching and starting again. It is the sound coming out of your own throat some nights, produced by the same physical problem in a body that solved that problem perfectly well for millions of years until people reached in and shortened the face. We built a copy of our own difficulty into another species in about 200 years, without meaning to, simply by preferring the way a flat face looked. Nothing in the wolf lineage was ever going to arrive there on its own. The snoring in the house is not always yours, and that is the part worth carrying into what comes next, because it shows the mechanism in the plainest possible form. Shorten the face, keep the soft tissue, crowd the throat, and you get a body that struggles to breathe, struggles to swallow safely, and makes noise while it sleeps. That is what a bulldog is. Something quite similar happened to your ancestors. Not in 2 centuries, but across a stretch of time researchers usually count in the hundreds of thousands of years, and not because anyone preferred the look of it. The face pulled back, the tongue turned down into the throat, the crossing moved into the open, and the risk arrived with it. What the bulldog does not have, and never will, is the thing that arrangement gave you. It carries the cost of a crowded throat and receives nothing in return except a face that people find appealing. You carry a very similar cost and receive a voice. So the shortened face cannot be the whole answer. If crowding the throat were enough to produce speech, the kennels of Europe would be full of talking dogs, and every pug on earth would be doing something no ape has managed. Crowding a throat makes an animal choke and snore. It does not make an animal speak. There is a further difference, and it does not involve anything being added to the human body. In the throat of every other great ape alive, a chimpanzee, a gorilla, an orangutan, There is a structure sitting just above the vocal folds that you do not have. There is also a second one, a chamber of air, that some of them carry into their chest. Both were present in the animals we came from. Both are gone from you. It has taken researchers a long time to work out what their absence did, and the answer turned out to run in the opposite direction from what anyone expected. Try something small while you are lying there, quietly enough that it does not wake anyone. Hum a single note and hold it. Do not try to make it beautiful. Just keep it level and notice how long you can keep it in the same place. Most people can hold a steady pitch for 10 or 15 seconds without any training at all, and the note stays where it was put. It does not slide. It does not break into a second tone underneath itself. It does not crack into roughness halfway through. That steadiness feels like nothing, like the least impressive thing a body could do. It is, in fact, close to the center of the whole question, and no other ape on this planet can do it. Deep in the rainforests of Borneo and Sumatra, there is an animal that has spent its life making sound in a way you never could. A mature male orangutan carries a pouch of air in his throat, a sac branching off the voice box and reaching down under the skin of the neck and chest, and it can hold a volume of air comparable to a large bottle. When he calls, he fills it. The sound that comes out is called the long call, and it can run for a minute or more, a series of deep roaring pulses that build and then fall away into groans, and researchers in the field have found that it carries for something close to 1 kilometre through dense forest. 1 kilometre of leaves and trunks and wet air, and other orangutans hear it and know who it is and roughly where he is standing. Now put that next to your own voice at its absolute maximum. Shout as loudly as you physically can, and in open air with nothing in the way, a person might be heard clearly at perhaps a couple of 100 meters. In forest it would be far less. You could stand on one side of a valley and scream until your throat tore, and someone on the other side would hear a faint sound that could have been anything. The orangutan says his own name across that valley without effort and then goes back to eating fruit. Something in the human throat gave up an enormous amount of reach, and the surprising part is what it gave up in order to do it. Just above your vocal folds, in every other primate that has been examined, there is a thin extra flap of tissue. Anatomists call them vocal membranes, or vocal lips, and they sit on top of the folds like a second, much lighter set of curtains hanging in front of the first. Researchers who surveyed more than 40 primate species found the membranes present in every single one of them. From the smallest monkeys to the gorilla, you do not have them. Somewhere in the human line they were lost, and the loss is unusual enough that it counts as one of the few clearly human features of the entire vocal apparatus. For a long time, nobody could say what that absence was for, and the assumption ran the obvious way, that a more complicated instrument must be the more capable one. The evidence now suggests the opposite. A membrane like that is very light, so it vibrates easily and it can be driven into motion at a much lower cost in air, which is part of why a small monkey can produce a call loud enough to hurt human ears. But a light membrane vibrating on top of a heavier fold is a system with two things moving at once, and two coupled vibrating structures do not stay polite. They fall in and out of step. The pitch jumps to half its value and back. It splits into tones that were never asked for. It slides into roughness and chaos. And anyone who has heard the scream of a monkey or the wail of a chimpanzee has heard exactly that texture, a sound that is enormous and impossible to ignore and completely impossible to control. The apes did not lose an ability. They kept an instrument that shouts. What the human line did was strip the instrument down. The membranes went. The air sac went with them, and its disappearance is nearly as strange, because a laryngeal air sac is standard equipment across the apes and was almost certainly present in the animals we descend from. All that remains of it in you is a small blind pocket beside each vocal fold, a few millimeters deep, which surgeons call the laryngeal ventricle. It holds nothing, and it does nothing you would notice, most of the time. Occasionally it does something else. In people who spend years forcing air through a closed throat, trumpet players, glass blowers, some wind instrument professionals, that little pocket can slowly balloon outward through the tissue of the neck until it forms a visible swelling that fills with air when they blow and empties when they stop. Surgeons call it a laryngocele, and it is treated as a curiosity of the profession. It is also, structurally, an air sac. The instructions for building one were never fully deleted. Under enough pressure, over enough years, a human throat will occasionally start growing the thing an orangutan is born with. There is a further reason the sac may have had to go, beyond the loss of the tissue itself. Work with physical and computer models of ape vocal tracts suggests that a large chamber hanging off the airway acts as a smear. It absorbs and re-radiates sound in a way that pulls the sharp peaks of a vowel closer together and blurs the difference between one vowel and another. A sac makes a call bigger, and it makes a call vaguer. For an animal announcing its presence across a kilometre of forest, vague is fine, because the message is simply that he exists and he is over there. For an animal that needs a listener to tell one sound from another sound at a distance of 1 metre, vague is fatal. What was left after both structures were gone is a plain pair of folds in a plain open tube, with no second surface to fight with and no chamber of trapped air to blur the output. And the sound that comes off it is boring in the best possible sense. It is regular. It is predictable. It sits where you put it, and it stays there while the tongue above it goes to work at speed. Every syllable you have ever said depended on the source underneath being dull enough to build on. This is the shape of the trade, and it is worth being honest about which side is bigger. You gave up the ability to be heard at distance. Think about what that has cost across the whole run of human existence, because it is not a small thing. A person who wanders too far from the group cannot call them back. A mother on a beach cannot reach a child at the far end of it with her voice alone. Every solution people have ever invented for this problem is a workaround for the same defect. The whistle, the horn, the drum, the bell, the flare, the wire, the phone in the room with you now, all of it built by a species whose own voice cannot cross a field. The orangutan has never needed any of it. He opens his throat, and the forest hears him. You are lying in a house that is full of devices whose entire purpose is to carry your voice further than your body can throw it, and you have never once thought of that as a disability, because the exchange happened so long ago that the loss was finished before anyone could remember having the other thing. Now, before this settles into a neat story, it needs breaking, because the simplest version of it is wrong and it has been repeated for decades. The version that gets repeated says the human larynx dropped low in the throat, that this made a long open chamber above it, and that the long chamber is what makes speech possible. The first two parts are true, the last part does not hold, and the animal that ruins it is not exotic at all. On an autumn night in Scotland or in the woods of Central Europe, a red deer stag opens his mouth and roars, and while he is roaring he pulls his larynx down his neck. Not a little. He hauls it most of the way to his breastbone, stretching the tube above it to its full length, and researchers who filmed this with X-rays found the animal doing deliberately, several times a minute, what human anatomy does permanently. A koala does something comparable and carries an extra pair of folds besides. Deer and koalas both use the low larynx for the same reason, which is that a longer tube makes a deeper sound and a deeper sound suggests a larger animal, and in the autumn, a stag has excellent reasons to sound larger than he is. So the descended larynx is not a human invention. It is not even rare. It evolved more than once, in animals that are not remotely close to us, for a purpose that has nothing to do with language, and not one of those species has ever produced a word. Whatever the low larynx is doing in your throat, it is not the thing that separates you. There is one further piece of evidence that closes this off, and it comes from a zoo in Indiana. An orangutan there, a young male, learned to copy the pitch and rhythm of sounds a researcher made at him, producing vowel-like noises on demand that were not part of any orangutan repertoire ever recorded in the wild. He was not imitating words, and nobody claimed he was. What he demonstrated was that the will to control the voice, the attention, the willingness to try, the ability to adjust output to match a model, is present in an ape that will never speak. The animal wanted to do it. The animal tried. The tissue in his throat produced something rough and unstable and roughly right, and there the matter ended. So the fork in the road is not where the story usually puts it. It is not the drop of the larynx, which deer manage without thinking. It is not effort or intelligence or desire, which an orangutan in Indiana supplied. Part of it, and researchers now argue it is a significant part, is a subtraction, a throat that had pieces removed until what remained was too simple to misbehave. The gain came from losing something, which is not how anyone expects a body to improve, and the price for it was volume, reach, and the ability to be heard by anyone more than a field away. And even that is not enough on its own. A clean instrument is still only an instrument. Something has to play it, and playing it means controlling the flow of air across it with a precision that no clean throat provides by itself. The animal that shows this most clearly has lungs almost identical to yours, a diaphragm almost identical to yours, and a chest that works on the same principle, and it still cannot say a word. What it cannot do is choose when to breathe. There is something your body did the last time you spoke a long sentence, and it did it before you said a word. You took a breath. Not a standard breath. Not the one you have been taking all evening without noticing, but a breath sized to the sentence that had not yet left your mouth. Speech researchers have measured this carefully, and the finding is consistent enough to be uncomfortable. People draw in more air before a long utterance than before a short one, and they do it before the first syllable, which means the amount of air loaded into the chest is decided by a sentence that exists nowhere yet except as a plan. Your lungs were filled to a level chosen by something you had not said. Then, having taken that breath, you did something with it that almost nothing else alive can do. You let it out slowly, over 8 or 10 or 15 seconds, while holding the pressure underneath your vocal folds almost perfectly steady the entire way. That is harder than it sounds. The chest is emptying. The elastic recoil of the ribs and lungs is falling away as they deflate, and the pressure driving the sound ought to be dropping steadily along with it. It does not. A set of muscles between and around your ribs and across your abdomen make continuous corrections all the way down, breaking the collapse at first and then pushing at the end, so that the sound leaving your throat keeps its strength from the first word to the last. Nobody taught you this. You have been doing it since you were about 2 years old. Toward the end of a long sentence you go further still, speaking below the level at which the chest would naturally come to rest, squeezing out air the ribs would rather keep, which is why the last few words of a very long sentence are the ones that come out thin and pressed. You have felt that happen, and you have never once stopped to wonder why the end of a sentence should feel like effort. At rest you breathe somewhere around 12 to 20 times a minute, and the in-breath takes roughly 40% of each cycle. When you speak, that ratio breaks apart completely. The intake compresses down to 1/10 of the cycle or less, a fast, quiet snatch of air, and the out-breath stretches to fill everything that remains. You are running 2 different breathing systems in the same chest, and you switch between them without ever deciding to. The chimpanzee's voice obeys its lungs. Your lungs obey your voice. In the forests of Uganda, the chimpanzee from the beginning of tonight is awake now, and the call it makes is the most familiar sound of its species. Researchers call it the pant hoot. Listen to a recording once and you will never mistake it for anything else, because the structure of the sound is the structure of breathing itself made audible. It begins with low, soft hoots, builds through a fast panting section where the animal is producing sound on the way in as well as on the way out, then climbs into a high scream and falls away. The in-breaths are not silent gaps between the notes, they are notes. The whole call is a breathing cycle turned up loud, and its rhythm is set by the lungs rather than imposed on them. That is not a defect in the call. For an animal announcing itself across a valley, the rising and falling of the breath is a perfectly good structure, and different individuals shape it differently enough that other chimpanzees can tell who is calling, but it reveals the boundary. A chimpanzee's voice rides on top of its breathing. Yours has its breathing arranged underneath it minute after minute, sentence after sentence, according to a plan that lives in the head. People who have worked with apes for decades have found something else along the same line. Great apes have proven very hard to train on tasks that require holding the breath or producing a long, even, deliberately sustained sound on command. There are famous individuals who have learned surprising things, an orangutan who learned to whistle, apes who have learned to blow, and these cases are real and they matter, and it is worth noticing how much attention each one has received. That is the point. Every case is a documented event with a name attached. A 3-year-old child who can hold her breath in the bath and then sing a line of a song is not a documented event. She is a Tuesday. Consider what else that control allows. A person can decide to stop breathing entirely and then do it, which sounds trivial until you try to find another primate that will An untrained adult can hold a breath for around a minute, and divers who have practiced can go far beyond that. Along the coasts of Southeast Asia and southern Japan, there are communities who have spent generations diving for food on a single lungful, descending and working on the bottom and coming back up, several hundred times in a working day. No ape swims like that, and most great apes avoid deep water entirely, partly because the body is dense and partly because the breath will not be commanded to wait. Where does the difference sit, if the lungs are nearly the same and the diaphragm is nearly the same? Part of the answer, according to work that anatomists have argued over for years, may sit in the spinal cord. The nerves that reach the muscles between your ribs and across your belly leave the cord in its chest region, and in humans, the bony canal that carries the cord through that region is noticeably wider than it is in other apes. Wider canal, researchers proposed, means more nervous tissue, and more nervous tissue means finer control over the muscles that meter out air. When they looked at older fossils, including the famous skeleton of a boy found near Lake Turkana in Kenya, some found the canal narrow in the chest region, closer to the ape condition, which suggested that fine breath control arrived late in our line. That reading has been challenged since, and other explanations for the difference have been offered, so the honest summary is that the fossil evidence remains contested. What is not contested is the living difference. The nerve supply to the human breathing muscles is unusually rich, and the cortex has a degree of access to those muscles that other primates do not appear to have. There is a second reason your breath came free, and it has nothing to do with the throat at all. A galloping animal cannot breathe on its own schedule. In many four-legged mammals, the breathing cycle is locked to the stride, one breath for one bound, because the front legs strike the ground and the impact drives the chest, and the guts slam forward and back against the diaphragm like a piston. A running dog is being breathed by its own legs. The chimpanzee walking on its knuckles carries part of its weight through its arms and shoulders, and its chest is doing structural work while it moves. When the human line stood upright, the rib cage was taken out of the business of locomotion entirely. It became a container hanging off a vertical spine, doing nothing but breathing, and its rhythm no longer had to answer to the ground. You can walk up a hill and talk. You can run and count out loud. No other ape can hold a conversation while it travels, and the reason is not politeness. Now the bill for all of this, which arrives in small amounts every day of your life. Climb 2 flights of stairs and try to finish a sentence at the top, and you will hear it immediately. The words thinning out, the sentence chopped into pieces, the humiliating little gasp in the middle of a word. Talk for a long time without pausing properly and you will feel lightheaded, because you have been ventilating on the schedule your sentences demanded rather than the schedule your blood wanted. Talk all day and your voice goes rough by evening. The coordination required is fine enough that when its timing is disturbed, speech itself becomes difficult, which is part of what happens in stammering, where the trouble sits in the meeting point between breath, voice and articulation rather than in any single one of them. And because your breathing has been wired into the part of you that plans and decides, it can also be reached by everything else that lives there. Worry gets into it. Almost everyone has had the experience of noticing, hours after the fact, that they had been holding their breath while reading a difficult message. Fear speeds it. Grief makes it catch. No chimpanzee in that Ugandan forest has ever lain awake with its breathing disturbed by a thought about tomorrow, because in that animal, the thought and the breath are not connected by a wire wide enough to carry it. The same night is over both bodies. One of them is breathing at a rate set entirely by its blood. The other is breathing at a rate that a memory from 4 years ago can still interrupt, and it is happening right now, while you lie there. If you've been listening to this for a while, your breathing has already slowed and lengthened without any instruction from you, and it will slow further as you drift. And the only reason you can feel that happening at all is that the machinery is partly yours to feel. That is the arrangement. The wire that lets a sentence reach down into your lungs is the same wire that lets a bad hour reach down into them, and the same wire that lets you, deliberately, right now, take one slow breath and put it where you want it. A chimpanzee has never had that choice, in either direction. So the throat has been cleaned out, the membranes gone, and the sac gone, leaving an instrument that holds a steady note. The lungs beneath it have been freed from the legs and handed over to the part of the brain that makes plans. A body could have both of those things and still say nothing at all, and here is why. Every sound a chimpanzee makes, it would make even if it had been raised entirely alone. The call is not learned. It arrives with the animal. Most of the species on this planet are the same, born already knowing their whole vocabulary, unable to add a single item to it across an entire lifetime. Something has to happen for a body to take a sound in through its ears and put that same sound back out through its throat, and it is far rarer than intelligence. The creature that shows it most clearly is not an ape, and it is not a mammal. It weighs about 12 grams. It is probably asleep in a hedge somewhere near you at this moment, and it learned its song the way a child learns to talk, by listening to an adult and practising badly for weeks. Hum again, very quietly, just for a second, and pay attention to where the sound seems to be coming from. It does not arrive at your ears from the outside the way another person's voice does. Most of it travels up through the bones of your skull and the fluid of your head and reaches the hearing organ from behind, which is why a recording of your own voice sounds wrong to you and correct to everybody else. That doubled hearing, the sound of yourself arriving from inside while the sound of others arrives from outside, is not a quirk. It is the equipment you learn to speak with. Every word you know was acquired by hearing it from someone else's mouth, and then adjusting the noise coming from inside your own head until the two matched closely enough. You were doing this constantly at 18 months old, and you have not entirely stopped. Move to a new region for a few years and your vowels will drift toward the people around you without your consent. That process has a name, vocal learning, and it is one of the rarest capacities on this planet. Among mammals it barely exists. There are somewhere in the region of 6,000 mammal species alive, and the number known to modify their vocal output by copying what they hear can be listed on 2 hands. Almost every mammal on Earth is born already holding its complete vocabulary. Among birds, the ability is commoner, though still confined to 3 groups: the songbirds, the parrots, and the hummingbirds, and those 3 are not each other's closest relatives. The capacity appeared separately in each of them, which tells you it is useful enough to be worth evolving more than once and difficult enough that most lineages never manage it. A cat raised alone will make cat sounds. A cow raised by a person will make cow sounds, correctly, without ever having heard one. The sounds are inherited the way the shape of the ears is inherited, and they arrive finished, and nothing can be added to them for the whole of that animal's life. A chimpanzee raised entirely among humans from birth still produces the same set of calls its species has always produced, and this was tested seriously in the early 20th century, when a couple raised a young chimpanzee alongside their own infant son in the same house, treating both as much alike as they could manage. The chimpanzee learned an enormous amount. It never said a word. The child, meanwhile, had begun picking up chimpanzee food barks, which alarmed his parents enough that the experiment was ended. Only one of those 2 young bodies was capable of importing sound from outside itself, and it was not the stronger one. So consider what is asleep in a hedge outside your window tonight, weighing about as much as a heaped spoonful of sugar. The zebra finch comes from the dry interior of Australia. It is grey and orange and marked around the face like something painted, and the males sing. A young male does not hatch knowing his song. He hatches knowing only that he is supposed to acquire one, which is a very different inheritance. In his first weeks he listens to an adult male nearby, usually his father, and something in his brain takes a copy of that song and stores it. Then, several weeks later, he begins to make sound, and what comes out at first is a mess. Researchers call it subsong. It is soft, unstructured, wandering, with no reliable rhythm and no consistent notes, and it sounds to a human ear exactly like what it is, which is a young animal experimenting with an instrument it does not yet know how to hold. Any adult hearing it would not be able to say what species he is trying to be. He does this for weeks. He does it thousands of times a day. Estimates put the total number of practice renditions across the learning period in the tens of thousands, and some researchers put the figure much higher, and slowly, over about 2 months, the mess narrows. Fragments start repeating, the rhythm firms up. Notes that were smeared become distinct, and one by one they slide into the order they hold in the song he memorized. By around 90 days after hatching, the song is fixed, and from then on he will sing essentially that same song, with only small variation, for the rest of his life. The bird has done something no chimpanzee has ever done. He took a sound in through his ears, held it, compared his own output to it, and reshaped his own body until the two agreed. Now put a human infant beside him. Somewhere around 6 or 7 months, a baby begins producing strings of repeated syllables, the ba 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 and da 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 that every parent on earth recognizes and no parent has ever taught. It appears on roughly the same schedule in every documented culture, in every language community, in babies who will grow up to speak languages with entirely different sounds. The syllables mean nothing. They are not attempts at words. They are the same thing the young finch is doing in the hedge. A body running its new instrument through its range to find out what it can do, comparing the result to a memory of what the adults sound like. The clearest evidence that this is practice and not imitation of meaning comes from deaf infants raised by parents who sign to them. Those babies babble too with their hands, producing repetitive, meaningless hand shapes on a similar developmental schedule. The drive to rehearse a communication system is running underneath, independent of which channel it eventually pours into. There is a detail in how both of them learn that ought to be better known. A young finch does not learn well from a loudspeaker. Play him a recording of a perfect adult song, on repeat, for as long as you like, and he acquires it poorly or not at all, but let him sit near a living adult male who sings at him and responds to him, and the copying works. Something about the presence of another body in the room is part of the mechanism. The same thing has been found in human infants. In one well-known set of experiments, babies who had never heard Mandarin were exposed to it by a live speaker who played with them, and they picked up sound distinctions from that language. A matched group received exactly the same speech through a screen, the same speaker, the same words, the same hours, and they learned nothing measurable at all. The sound alone was not enough. It had to come out of a person who was there. And it is not only birds and people. In the forests of Panama and Costa Rica there is a small bat, the greater sack-winged bat, whose pups hang in the roost and babble. Researchers who recorded them found the pups producing long bouts of syllable strings for weeks on end, mixing adult syllable types together, repeating them, varying them, in bouts that could go on for almost 3/4 of an hour. The bouts appear in daylight while the mothers are resting. They continue for around 7 weeks, and the analysis found the same features that define babbling in a human infant. A bat pup hanging upside down in the dark of a hollow tree, practicing sounds it will need later, is doing the thing your body did in a cot. That is the return on the trade. This is worth sitting with, because most of tonight has been an account of what your throat gave up, and the ledger has been running in one direction. Here is the other side of it, and it is not small. Your voice was issued to you unfinished. Where nearly every animal on this planet receives a complete set of sounds at birth and can never add to it, you received an empty instrument and a mechanism for filling it, and the filling never entirely stops. A person can learn a new word at 80. A person can move to another country in middle age and slowly, imperfectly, acquire sounds their mouth was never shaped around, sounds that do not exist in the language they grew up in. Nothing about that is guaranteed by having lungs, or having a throat, or being clever. Elephants are clever. Octopuses are clever. Neither of them can borrow a sound from a neighbour. The capacity to take in a noise made by another body and reproduce it with your own is so rare that when it turns up in an unexpected species, it makes the scientific news, and you use it to ask what time it is. There is a further gift hidden inside the first one, and it is the reason this matters more than a curiosity of the throat, because sound can be copied, sound can be inherited outside the body. A finch inherits one song from one tutor. A human infant inherits a whole system, tens of thousands of words, and every one of those words was passed to it by a mouth belonging to somebody else, and those mouths got them from mouths that are now gone. The word you are hearing at this exact moment has been handed body to body for longer than any written record covers. Nothing in your vocabulary was invented by you. You did not make a single one of the sounds you used to think with. Every word you own was given to you by somebody else's mouth, most of them by people who were bending over you and repeating themselves patiently while you produced noises that meant nothing at all. That is what the trade bought. Not volume, not reach. A body that can be filled by other bodies. And it goes out as easily as it came in, which is the part that never stops being strange. When you speak tomorrow morning, You will push a column of air through a set of folds and shape it with a tongue, and the pattern of pressure waves you produce will travel across the room and press on a membrane inside another person's head, and something they were not thinking about a second earlier will now be in their mind. Nothing about the throat explains why that works. The throat only makes the noise. But the noise can be learned, which means it can be shared, and once it can be shared, it can be accumulated, and everything that follows from that has been the entire history of your species. So, the picture is nearly complete. A simplified instrument, a set of lungs answerable to a plan, and a brain willing to copy sound from outside itself. Except that last one raises a problem that has been sitting quietly in the room this whole time, and it has 4 legs, and it is probably asleep near a bed somewhere in your neighbourhood. A dog hears human speech constantly. Some of them have been shown to learn hundreds of spoken words, one of them well over 1,000, retrieving the right toy by name from a heap. That animal takes the sound in, holds it, and matches it to a thing in the world. The ear is not the problem. The memory is not the problem. The intelligence plainly is not the problem. And still, after 15,000 years of listening to us, no dog has ever said one of those words back. Something is happening in your throat right now that you have no way of noticing. You've been following words for a while tonight, silently, without moving your mouth, and while you do that, the muscles inside your voice box are not entirely still. Researchers working with sensitive electrodes on the neck have picked up faint activity in the laryngeal muscles of people who are reading silently or thinking in words. Tiny movements far below anything a person could feel, as though the throat were being sent a copy of a message it has not been asked to deliver. The line from the thinking part of your brain to your vocal folds does not switch off when you stop speaking. It idles. A word that never leaves you still travels most of the way down. That line is the subject of tonight's deepest difference, and the animal that reveals it is the one already sleeping in the house. Consider what a dog can actually do with human speech, because the record is more impressive than most people assume. A border collie in South Carolina named Chaser was taught the names of individual objects by a retired psychology professor who worked with her for hours every day across years, and by the end she reliably retrieved more than 1,000 named items from a pile, over 1,000 distinct spoken words, each attached to a specific thing. Another dog in Germany had earlier been shown to do something similar with around 200 objects, and to work out, when given a new word she had never heard, that it probably belonged to the one unfamiliar item in the room. Researchers in Budapest went further and trained dogs to lie still and awake inside a brain scanner, unrestrained, free to leave, which is its own small miracle of patience. What they found in those scans is the part that matters here. The dogs processed the meaning of familiar words mainly in the left side of the brain and the tone of voice mainly in the right, a division of labour that looks a great deal like the one in your own head, and the reward centres lit up strongly only when a praising word arrived in a praising tone. Words in meaning out, tone weighed separately. That animal is not merely reacting to noise. So the ear works, the memory works, and the sorting works, and the mouth stays shut. The block is not in the throat either, because a dog's larynx is a perfectly good sound maker, capable of a range from a low growl to a scream. The block sits in the wiring between them. In you, the region of the brain that controls the muscles of the voice box sends fibers that run down and connect directly to the small cluster of cells in the brainstem that drives those muscles. Direct, meaning the command does not have to be handed off to older machinery on the way. Anatomists have looked hard for the same direct connection in other mammals, including monkeys, and what they find instead is an indirect route, the signal passing through intermediate structures that are much older and much less precise. There is a further difference in where that control sits. In your brain, the patch of cortex that governs the larynx is located inside the primary motor strip, in among the areas that move your hand and your face, the newest and most direct level of command the nervous system has. In monkeys, the equivalent vocal area appears to sit further forward, in a region that plans movements rather than issuing them, one step removed from the muscles. The same job, filed on a different floor of the building. The consequences show up in the most brutal way possible in the experimental record. Damage to the relevant cortex in a monkey does not silence it. The animal keeps calling because its calls were never being issued from there. The calls come from deeper structures in the midbrain and the limbic system, the same regions that produce a dog's bark, and those regions do not do fine sequencing. They do not deliver a syllable at a chosen moment. They produce a whole call, complete, appropriate to a situation, arriving with the emotion that triggered it. A barking dog is not choosing to bark the way you choose to say a name. Something happens, and the bark follows it out. Now look at the line that exists in you, because it is stranger than it needed to be. The nerve that runs down to your voice box on the left side does not go there directly. It leaves the skull, travels down the neck, continues past your throat into the chest, loops underneath the great artery arching off the top of your heart, and then turns around and climbs all the way back up to the larynx it passed on the way down. Roughly 30 centimeters of detour to reach a destination a few centimeters from where it started. Anatomists call it the recurrent laryngeal nerve, and the reason for the loop is a piece of inherited plumbing from fish, where the equivalent nerve ran a short, sensible course through the gill arches. When the neck stretched out, the nerve stayed hooked around the vessel, and every generation since has built the detour again. In a giraffe, the same nerve runs down the entire neck and back up it, several meters of cable for a journey of a few inches. What that means for you is that your voice depends on a wire that spends part of its journey next to your heart. Surgeons operating on the thyroid gland work with extraordinary care around it, because a slip leaves the patient hoarse or breathy for life. A swelling of the aorta in the chest can press on it and take the voice away, and a hoarse voice is occasionally the first sign a doctor notices of a problem that has nothing whatsoever to do with the throat. And then there is the other end of the line. A person can be lying in a hospital bed, fully awake, fully themselves, holding a word in mind with complete clarity, knowing exactly which word it is, knowing the shape of it and the sound of it, and precisely what they wish to say to the person standing beside the bed, and the word will not come. Not because they have forgotten it, because the route from the place where the word is held to the muscles that would build it has been damaged, and there is nothing else in the body that can carry it. There are people for whom the difficulty is purely in assembling the movements, the mouth refusing to sequence a series of positions it has performed 1,000,000 times. They know. They can hear themselves failing. Somewhere in the same house, very often, a dog is lying on the floor listening, and it understands the tone perfectly, and it has never once needed a line like that, because it was never given one to lose. This is the deeper price, and it is easy to miss while counting the obvious ones. The voice was not simply handed over. It was hung on a single fragile route with no backup, running from the newest part of the brain, down a nerve that detours around the heart, to a pair of folds in a crowded throat. Everything about that arrangement is exposed. Every other species has its calls wired into the oldest and best protected parts of the nervous system, where nothing short of catastrophe reaches them. Yours were moved upstairs, to the fine floor, where the wiring is precise and delicate and near the surface. There is one more layer under this, and it was found in a single family in London. Across 3 generations of that family, roughly half the members had unusual difficulty with speech. The core problem was not vocabulary and not intelligence. It was the mouth. They struggled to perform rapid sequences of movements with the tongue, lips, and jaw, even when no speaking was involved, and the difficulty extended into their grammar and their language in ways researchers argued about for years. In 2001, the gene involved was identified. It is present in nearly every vertebrate that has been examined, in mice, in birds, in crocodiles, and it is not a gene for language, whatever the newspapers said at the time. It is a gene that regulates other genes, and it appears to be involved wherever fine sequential motor learning is happening. The human version differs from the chimpanzee version by 2 small changes in the protein. When researchers engineered mice to carry the human version, the animals did not talk, and nobody expected them to. What changed was subtler. The ultrasonic squeaks of the pups shifted slightly. The wiring in a region of the brain concerned with learning motor sequences grew differently, and the mice learned certain kinds of routines faster. Later work questioned the earlier claim that this gene had swept through our species recently, so the confident story from 20 years ago has been softened considerably, and the honest position now is that this is one contributing thread in something with many threads. It still tells you where to look, not at the noise, but at the machinery for stringing movements together in the right order at speed. And speed is what your mouth is doing constantly. In ordinary conversation, a person produces somewhere in the region of 10 to 15 speech sounds a second, each one requiring the tongue, lips, jaw, palate and vocal folds to arrive at a precise arrangement and leave it again before the next one, with the whole sequence planned several sounds ahead. That is among the most complicated fast motor tasks a human body performs, and you do it while walking, while distracted, while thinking about something else entirely. There is a small demonstration of that control available to you right now, and it costs nothing. Whisper a word. What you just did was hold your vocal folds apart so they could not vibrate at all, push a thin stream of air through the gap, and then shape that hiss with your tongue and lips into something another person could understand from a meter away. You produce language with the sound generator switched off. No other animal does this on request. A dog cannot whisper. It can be quiet or it can make a noise, and the volume of that noise is set by how it feels rather than by a decision about who might be asleep in the next room. So the line exists, it is fragile, and it is dedicated to sequencing. That should be the end of the account. But there is a condition attached to it that nobody agrees to, because nobody is old enough to be asked. The line has to be used early. If the sound never arrives from outside during a particular stretch of time near the beginning of a life, the machinery does not simply wait. The bird in the hedge is the clearest demonstration of it, and what happens to a young finch kept out of earshot of any adult male is not that he stays silent, he sings. That is the disturbing part. Your mouth is not empty right now, and it is not neutral either. Even lying still with nothing to say, the tongue has a resting posture, a default place it returns to between words and holds through silence. Phoneticians have described this as the settled position a speaker's mouth keeps when it is doing nothing, and it differs from language to language. A tongue trained on one language sits a little further forward or a little further back, the lips hold a slightly different degree of spread, the jaw rests at a marginally different angle, and none of it is chosen. It is a residue. It is the shape left behind by tens of thousands of hours of producing one particular set of sounds, and it is holding steady in your head at this moment while you lie in the dark thinking about nothing in particular. Your mouth has an accent even when it is closed. That posture was set early, and it was set during a stretch of time that has since closed. It began earlier than most people assume. In the last months before birth, the ear is already working, and low frequencies pass through the wall of the abdomen well enough that the rhythm and melody of a mother's speech get through, even if the individual words do not. Newborns show a preference for their mother's voice over a stranger's within days of being born, and for passages they were read repeatedly before they arrived. One study of newborn cries, recorded in the first days of life, found that the melody differed between babies born to French-speaking mothers and babies born to German-speaking mothers, the contour of the cry already leaning the way the surrounding language leans. The first thing those infants produced with their own throats was already shaped by a language they had never heard properly and could not yet understand. Here is what closed. Somewhere in your first year, before you had a single word, your hearing narrowed. At around 6 months, a baby can distinguish between speech sounds that its parents cannot hear the difference between at all, sounds from languages nobody in the house speaks, contrasts from every corner of the planet. Researchers have tested this by teaching infants to turn their heads when a sound changes, and the young ones turn for distinctions that adult speakers of their language reliably miss. Then, somewhere between about 8 and 12 months, that ability begins to fall away. The baby stops responding to contrasts that do not matter in the language around it. By the first birthday, in most cases, the ear has committed. This is not damage. It is the system doing exactly what it should, throwing away resolution it does not need in order to become fast and reliable at the sounds it does need. The cost only becomes visible decades later, when a fully grown adult sits in a language class and cannot hear the difference between 2 syllables that a native speaker finds as obvious as the difference between a dog and a cat. You have been in that position, or you will be. The information is arriving at your ear perfectly intact. The equipment that would have sorted it was retired before you could walk. The bird in the hedge shows the same architecture from the outside, which is why it has been studied so heavily. A young male zebra finch has to hear an adult male sing during a window in his first months. Not later. Not more of it later. During that window, in the most studied case, the memorizing phase runs roughly from the 4th week of life to somewhere around the 9th, and the practising runs on from there to about 90 days, when the song sets. If he hears a tutor, he stores the song and spends the following weeks grinding his own output toward it. If he hears nothing, he does not stay silent, which is the part that surprises people. He sings anyway. What comes out is called isolate song, and it is a real song with real structure, delivered with the same commitment, but the notes are wrong. The rhythm is off, the syllables are longer and less well organized, and the whole thing sits outside the normal range of his species. Another finch hearing it recognizes that something has gone wrong. Female finches, given a choice, are less interested in it, and the bird cannot fix it. Put a perfectly good adult tutor beside him afterwards for as long as you like, and the song stays the way it came out. He has crystallized. Whatever was open in him closed on schedule, regardless of whether anything came through it. There is a second experiment in that same literature which is even more revealing, and it concerns hearing rather than tutoring. A young finch prevented from hearing his own voice while he is learning cannot build a normal song either, because the whole method depends on comparing his output to the stored model, and with no feedback there is nothing to compare. That much is expected. What was not expected is what happens to an adult bird, long finished, song fixed for years, when he can no longer hear himself. The song does not stay perfect. Over the following months it slowly comes apart, notes drifting, structure loosening, like a hand losing its handwriting. He was not maintaining that song from memory. He was checking it constantly against what he heard every time he sang. The same thing happens in people, and it is gentler but unmistakable. An adult who loses their hearing keeps speaking, keeps every word, keeps the grammar, keeps the accent recognizably their own, and over years the articulation drifts, the volume control goes, the pitch wanders. Speech therapists work with this regularly. Nobody forgets how to talk. The system simply discovers that it had been steering by ear the whole time and never mentioned it. Then there is what happens when language arrives late rather than early, and one of the clearest records of that comes from Nicaragua. In the late 1970s, schools were opened in Managua for deaf children who until then had mostly grown up isolated from one another, each with a small set of homemade gestures and no shared language at all. The teaching methods failed. The children in the yard and on the buses built something else. Within a few years, the younger ones were using a full grammatical sign language that had not existed anywhere on Earth a decade earlier, and linguists who studied it found something they did not expect. The children who arrived youngest signed the most fluently and the most systematically, more so than the older students who had been there from the start and had effectively invented the first version. The younger arrivals took a rough system and made it sharper than their teachers. That is the window working in the direction it is designed to work. It is also, from the other side, the reason clinicians treat the timing of a deaf child's access to language as urgent rather than optional, and why cochlear implant outcomes are consistently better when the device goes in early rather than late. The same window that lets a small child pull a whole grammar out of a schoolyard is a window that narrows, and it narrows for accent too, which is the version most adults have direct experience of. People who begin a second language in childhood usually end up sounding like it belongs to them. People who begin after the teenage years usually do not, however fluent they become, however large the vocabulary, however perfect the grammar. Researchers argue about how sharp the boundary is, and about how much of the effect is neural and how much is social. And the honest position is that it is a gradient with a lot of individual variation rather than a wall. But the general shape is not in dispute. Something about the mouth becomes committed. This is the part with no refund. You were born able to acquire any language on this planet, all of them, without preference, along with the entire range of sounds any human throat can produce. Not one of those doors was closed to you, and the way your body took hold of the one language it was actually offered was by shutting the others, quietly, one distinction at a time, before you could form an opinion about it. The fluency you have was bought with the fluency you will never have. You did not lose the ability to speak Japanese. You lost the ability to hear it as a Japanese infant hears it, which is a smaller and much more permanent thing. Nobody consulted you. The window opened, the language in the room walked through it, and the window closed behind it. There is one more finding here, and it changes the temperature of all of it. Researchers took zebra finches raised in isolation, birds with abnormal isolate song, and let them found a small colony, and then they let generation follow generation. The first birds sang badly, their sons learned from them and sang slightly less badly. Their sons learned from those and sang closer still to the normal species song. Across roughly 3 or 4 generations, with nobody teaching them anything, with no correct model ever introduced from outside, the song drifted back to something very close to the ordinary song of a wild zebra finch. The species pattern reassembled itself out of a colony of birds who had never heard it, each generation nudging it a little further toward the shape it wanted to hold. Not one of those individual birds ever got its own song back. The correction happened between them, across time, in the space where one throat sings and a younger ear listens. That is where the ability lives, and it has never lived anywhere else. So the window closes and the individual is finished, and the whole system carries on regardless, because it was never really an individual system to begin with. By this point in the night, it would be reasonable to conclude that the line between us and everything else is absolute, that no other animal ever crosses it. That turns out to be untrue, and the exceptions are strange. A seal in New England, raised in a fisherman's house, grew up and began speaking in a voice that startled visitors. An elephant in a zoo in South Korea learned to shape sounds by putting his trunk into his own mouth. Each of them got there down a completely different road, using equipment that has nothing in common with yours or with each other's, and every one of them stopped at almost exactly the same place. There is a background sound in the room with you at this moment, a fan or rain or traffic a long way off, or the low hum a house makes when everything in it is switched off. Whatever it is, part of your hearing system has been running it through a filter all night, checking it, and every so often that filter reports a false positive. Almost everybody has had the experience of hearing their own name spoken inside the noise of running water, or being certain that someone in another room said something, and going to check, and finding nobody there. Your auditory system is tuned so aggressively for human speech that it will manufacture it out of nothing rather than risk missing it. It is looking for one specific thing in the world, all the time, awake and half asleep, and that thing is another human voice. Consider how narrow a target that is. In a fishing village on the coast of Maine in the early 1970s, a couple took in an orphaned harbour seal pup. They fed it so much that they named it after a vacuum cleaner, kept it in the bathtub, then in a pond, and talked to it constantly the way people do talk to an animal they have taken into the house. The seal outgrew the arrangement and went to the aquarium in Boston. Several years later, once he had matured, the staff started hearing a man's voice coming from the seal enclosure. Not a seal noise that resembled a voice. Low, gruff, unmistakably a middle-aged man from coastal Maine, telling visitors to get out of there and asking how they were, with the vowels of that stretch of coastline sitting in the sounds. People walking past assumed a keeper was hiding behind the rocks. Recordings of him exist, and they are unsettling to listen to, because the accent is the part your ear locks onto first, and an accent is not something an animal has any reason to possess. He was reproducing the speech of the man who raised him, decades after the fact, using a seal larynx and a seal throat and lungs adapted for holding air underwater. That seal was not a freak of one household. Researchers in Scotland later worked with young harbour seals in a controlled setting and found the same capacity in ordinary individuals, training them to copy sequences of notes and to shift the acoustic qualities of their calls to match a model, including melodies from human music. The seals could reshape their output on demand toward a sound they had heard. Whatever equipment allows that has been sitting in the species the whole time, unexercised, waiting for a household in Maine to switch it on. There is a footnote to that seal worth keeping. Years after he died, keepers at the same aquarium reported that one of his descendants, born in the tank, produced human-like sounds of his own without any of the bathtub upbringing. Whether that was inherited tendency or simply a young animal copying what it heard in a building full of talking people, nobody can say for certain. Biologists have noticed that the seal family sits in a very small club of mammals where this ability turns up at all, alongside whales, bats, and elephants, and one suggestion is that it has something to do with breeding on crowded beaches where thousands of animals are calling at once, and an individual voice has to be recognizable. Now change animals entirely. At a zoo in South Korea, there is an Asian elephant who says words in Korean. He was raised through his adolescence with no other elephants at all, only human keepers. And during those years, he began producing sounds that people around him recognized as speech. His method is unlike anything a human would think of. He puts the tip of his trunk into his own mouth and uses it as a movable structure inside the vocal tract, closing and shaping the space in a way an elephant's own anatomy does not otherwise allow. And out of that comes a handful of Korean words with the vowels and the pitch pattern, close enough that Korean speakers writing down what they heard agreed on what he was saying. Researchers who analysed the recordings found his pitch was far higher than a normal elephant call and sat in the range of a human speaking voice, which is not where an animal of that size naturally lives. He built a second instrument out of a limb and used it to reach a sound his own body could not make. The researchers noted the isolation and suggested that copying the voices around him may have been the only social channel available to an elephant with no elephants. Elephants do this in the wild too, and not only with voices. In Kenya, researchers recorded a young orphaned female living in an enclosure a few kilometers from the main highway between Nairobi and Mombasa, and the sound she made at night was not an elephant sound. It was the sound of trucks. She had reproduced the engine noise of the road she lived beside closely enough that the recordings matched the passing lorries. Another elephant, raised for years among a different species of elephant, picked up the chirping calls of the animals he had been housed with rather than the calls of his own kind. Whatever this ability is for, it appears to attach itself to whatever the animal happens to be surrounded by. Then there is the whale. At a research facility in San Diego, a diver working in an enclosure surfaced abruptly because he was convinced he had heard someone shouting at him to get out. The instruction had come from a beluga. That animal had begun producing bursts of sound with roughly the rhythm and the frequency of human conversation, and when the acoustics were analysed, the researchers found he was doing something physiologically expensive to achieve it. Belugas make sound with air sacs in the nasal passage rather than with a larynx like yours. To imitate the pitch and cadence of speech, he was overinflating those sacs and driving them at pressures well outside their normal range, working against the design of his own head. He kept it up for years and then stopped, around the time he reached maturity. And then the birds, which are stranger than all of them, because the machinery has nothing whatsoever in common with a mammal. A parrot has no lips. It cannot close its mouth around a sound the way you close yours to make a B or a P. Its sound comes from an organ at the base of the windpipe, where the tube splits toward the lungs, and it shapes the result with a thick mobile tongue and the walls of the throat. Working with that equipment, an African grey parrot in a laboratory in the United States learned to name objects, to give the colour of a thing, to say how many there were, to answer which of two things was larger, and to say no when he wanted the experimenter to stop. Researchers still argue about exactly how much of that was language and how much was a system of trained associations of remarkable sophistication, and the argument is a serious one on both sides. What nobody disputes is the sound. The bird produced human words, clearly, out of an organ that is not a larynx, in a mouth with no lips, in a skull the size of a walnut. Line these four up, and the picture is not what most people expect. A seal used a mammalian larynx. An elephant used its trunk as a moving part inside its mouth. A whale used nasal sacs pushed past their limits. A bird used a syrinx and a tongue, and no lips at all. 4 different pieces of equipment, 4 improvised routes, none of them the human route, none of them related to each other, and each one arrived at a rough imitation of human speech from a completely different direction. That is the first surprise. The second surprise is where they all stopped. Every one of them reproduced forms. They took a sound that already existed in the world and put it back out. Not one of them, in any documented case, went on to build an open-ended system out of it, generating new combinations for new situations, passing an expanding vocabulary to the next generation, using it to describe something that happened last week. The seal never taught another seal. The elephant's words did not spread through a herd. Whatever these animals reached, they reached alone, and it ended with them. And notice what all 4 had in common, because it is the part that is easy to walk past. The seal had no seals. The elephant had no elephants for years. The whale lived among divers. The parrot lived in a laboratory with one researcher who worked with him nearly every day for 30 years. Every single animal that has ever come close to human speech was an animal separated from its own kind and surrounded by people. They did not learn to talk because they were clever. They learned because there was nobody else in the room, and something in them kept reaching toward the only voices available. Which brings this back around to you lying in the dark. On a planet that carries somewhere in the region of 8 million species, you have now been through a good number of them tonight. The chimpanzee that cannot arrange its breath. The dog that knows 1,000 words and cannot return one. The orangutan with the throat that carries a kilometre. The finch that learns exactly the way you did and then closes. The bat, the mouse, the deer, the seal, the elephant, the whale, the parrot. Some of them are close relatives. Some of them share the learning. Some of them, in a bathtub in Maine or a stall in a Korean zoo, got close enough to make a person turn around. Not one of them can answer you. When you speak tomorrow, the only thing on this entire planet capable of receiving that and sending something back in kind will be another member of your own species. The ability is not shared with anything. There is no second door. Whatever the human throat bought with everything it gave up, it bought a conversation that only ever happens in one room. And yet, underneath all of it, the older voice is still in you and still working. If something startled you badly in the next few seconds, the sound that came out of your throat would not be a word. It would not be chosen, it would not be arranged, and it would sound remarkably like something a chimpanzee would produce in the same moment. That system was never removed. It sits below the new one, fully intact, waiting. You do not have to speak to hear the older voice in you. It appears when the newer one fails. Step unexpectedly onto something sharp, and the first sound is already leaving before the word for pain has formed. Lose your balance in the dark, and a short burst of air comes out of the throat, while the thinking part of the brain is still working out what moved. Begin to laugh hard enough, and the sentence you are trying to finish breaks into pieces, breath after breath taking control of the same muscles that had been serving language a moment earlier. You can decide to say a word. You cannot decide, in quite the same way, to produce the first cry of pain, the first gasp of fright, or the first helpless pulse of laughter. Those sounds belong to an older route through the brain, a route human speech did not replace. It built over it. The distinction is visible in the machinery. Voluntary speech depends heavily on networks across the cerebral cortex, including regions that plan sequences, control the larynx, and arrange the tongue and lips into movements that may last only a fraction of a second. Emotional vocalizations draw more strongly on a pathway descending through the anterior cingulate region and into the periaqueductal gray, a small area wrapped around the channel running through the midbrain. From there, signals reach the brainstem nuclei that coordinate the voice box, the face, and the breathing muscles. Researchers continue to debate the exact division of labor, because the two systems interact and neither works in complete isolation. The broad separation, however, is clear enough to appear in injury, brain imaging, and ordinary life. One route lets you choose a sound because it carries an idea. The other releases a sound because the body has entered a state. A chimpanzee living in the forests of western Tanzania relies mainly on that older arrangement. Its calls are closely tied to situations such as alarm, contact, aggression, food and play, and the emotional state helps open the gate that allows the voice to emerge. A chimpanzee can adjust a call in limited ways and can sometimes produce a sound more deliberately than older descriptions allowed, so it would be wrong to describe the animal as a simple reflex machine. It still does not possess human control over the moment-by-moment construction of a vocal sequence. When it is tickled or chased in play, it produces the sound researchers describe as laughter, a rapid series of breathy pulses that can occur during inhalation as well as exhalation. Young chimpanzees make it readily. Adults make it too. Similar play vocalizations occur across the great apes, and acoustic studies suggest that human laughter and ape laughter carry a real evolutionary continuity rather than a superficial resemblance. The sound in us has changed. Human laughter is produced mainly on the outward breath, with the chest releasing repeated pulses that can be fitted into the breathing control speech already required. Yet listen beneath the changed rhythm and the old structure remains. The jaw opens. The larynx is driven without a word. The diaphragm and rib muscles begin a sequence you did not plan. If the laughter becomes strong enough, voluntary speech stops. The older route temporarily takes the airway back. This can happen over something as small as another person beginning to laugh. Chimpanzees also show forms of laughter responding to the laughter of others during play, and studies have found that this socially prompted laughter differs from laughter produced directly by tickling or play contact. You can laugh to soften a disagreement, to signal that a sentence is friendly, or because a room of people has begun laughing before you know why. Still, the strongest laughter remains difficult to manufacture perfectly, and difficult to stop cleanly once it has begun. A body hears another body losing control of its breath, and some part of it prepares to join. That is why laughter is such a useful place to see the two vocal systems meeting. A person can produce a polite laugh on command, shaped for a social purpose, and the sound is often shorter, more regular, and more controlled. The same person can be overtaken by laughter a minute later, and the acoustics change because the route into the voice has changed. Brain imaging studies support a distinction between generating laughter deliberately and being moved into it, though the networks overlap. The planned version borrows the newer machinery. The helpless version rises through older tissue. Both leave through the same pair of vocal folds. Pain reveals the older system even more plainly. Touch a hot surface and the hand withdraws before conscious recognition is complete. A cry may travel with the withdrawal, short and rough, shaped less by the tongue than by pressure from the chest and sudden closure in the throat. The sound does not describe the injury. It announces that a body has been interrupted. Other primates use calls in comparable urgent states, and the midbrain systems involved in vocalization are closely connected to the systems that alter breathing, heart rate, and defensive movement. This is why a scream does not feel like ordinary speech spoken loudly. The whole body enters it. The shoulders rise, the abdomen tightens, the face changes, and the airway is recruited as part of a larger response. The same arrangement appears in crying. Before an infant knows a name for hunger, cold, or separation, it can produce a cry powerful enough to rearrange every adult in the room. Cry vocalizations appear before learned speech because the pathway that releases them is older and already functioning. This is also why losing language does not necessarily erase the whole human voice. After a stroke affecting the language networks of the left hemisphere, some people are left with severe non-fluent aphasia. They may understand far more than they can say. A familiar object can be in front of them, its use obvious, its name known in some inaccessible way, and the mouth cannot assemble the word. Yet laughter may still come naturally. A cry of pain may still be immediate. A cough, a sigh, and an emotional groan can remain available because those acts depend on partly different pathways. In some patients, familiar songs or well-learned phrases can be produced more easily than newly composed speech. Clinicians have known for more than a century that a person unable to speak a sentence may sometimes sing parts of that sentence, and this observation helped inspire melodic intonation therapy. The effect is not universal. Singing does not simply live in one untouched half of the brain, and researchers still disagree about how much benefit comes from melody, rhythm, slowed production, or repeated formulaic language. The important point is narrower. Propositional speech and familiar singing are not organized in exactly the same way, so damage can separate abilities that ordinary life makes seem inseparable. A person may be unable to tell you what happened and still join the opening line of a song learned 40 years earlier. The voice has more than one road out. There are clinical cases that show a related division in the face. Some people with particular brain injuries cannot bare their teeth or smile properly when asked, yet the same muscles move during genuine amusement. Others can move the face on command while the spontaneous emotional expression is weakened. Neurologists call this an automatic voluntary dissociation. The voice carries a less tidy version of the same architecture. You can command the larynx to whisper, sing, or say a name. You can also be made to gasp by a falling object before you know it will miss you. One set of folds receives both messages. The body never cleared away the first line when the second one arrived. It kept the emergency system because speech could not do its work. A sentence is too slow for sudden pain. A carefully chosen word is too slow for a threat that has already reached the skin. Even laughter would lose much of its social force if every pulse had to be selected and placed like a consonant. The older system remains because there are moments when meaning must leave the body before language is ready. It is not useless. What changed is the world that now surrounds it. A chimpanzee's call remains one of the main ways its internal state becomes public. Human beings built a second layer capable of hiding, revising, and contradicting the first. You can say that you are calm while your voice trembles. You can say that nothing hurts while the breath shortens around the words. You can choose a sentence designed to conceal exactly what the older pathway is trying to reveal. The listener often believes the older system. A slight break in pitch, a breath taken too early, a laugh arriving where no joke was made, and another person begins to suspect that the words are incomplete. Long before a child understands a sentence, it responds to the melody, intensity, and timing of the voice. Long before humans had a vocabulary as large as ours, bodies were already reading bodies through air. Speech did not silence that channel, it gave it something to run underneath. This is why the voice you use tomorrow will never be made entirely of words. Every sentence will carry small traces of breathing, tension, and timing that you did not consciously add. The cortex can choose the message, but it does not own the whole instrument. The older pathways alter the pressure beneath the vocal folds, the set of the larynx and the rhythm of the chest. A person can train these effects and actors can imitate many of them, though no training turns the voice into a fully transparent machine. Some part of the body continues speaking alongside the sentence. The chimpanzee has been present through this entire account because it stands close enough for the older layer to be recognizable. Tickling produces breathy laughter in both bodies. Sudden conflict can produce a sharp call in both. Pain recruits the throat in both. The difference is that the chimpanzee lives largely within that vocal floor, while a human life is built above it. Human speech can discuss a danger that is not present, remember a pain that ended years ago, or make another person laugh using an event that never happened. The old calls are tied closely to the moment. Words leave the moment and return carrying things that are absent. Yet when the absent thing becomes too strong, when remembered grief catches the breath or a joke collapses control of the chest, the upper floor gives way for a few seconds and the older voice comes through. It was there before your first word. It will remain after your last deliberate sentence. Tonight it is quiet because nothing has asked for it. Your throat is relaxed, the vocal folds apart, the breath passing through without vibration. Even so, the root is open. A sudden pain would use it. A sob could use it. Laughter could use it. No lesson would be required. Under every word you have ever learned, your body still carries a voice that was never taught. Your throat is holding two systems on top of each other, and the older one is still working faithfully for a body that once needed no words. Somewhere beyond the room, a bird has gone quiet for the night, and inside its sleeping brain the newer kind of voice is beginning to play again. Somewhere beyond the room, the bird that went quiet at the end of the last thought is still asleep. No sound leaves the beak. Beneath the skull, however, the circuit that produced the day's song has begun to move. The bird is a male zebra finch, one of the small Australian songbirds that appeared earlier tonight as a young animal listening to an adult, storing a model, then spending weeks turning loose babble into a fixed sequence. By roughly 3 months of age, in most normally developing males, the sequence has become recognizable and stable. A few distinct syllables occur in an order repeated many times each day. That precision made the zebra finch useful for a question that could not be answered simply by listening. What happens to a learned voice after the singer falls asleep? To reach the answer, researchers placed fine electrodes near neurons in a region called the robust nucleus of the archipallium, usually shortened to RA. RA is a compact cluster in the bird's forebrain whose cells send commands toward the breathing circuits and the syrinx, the sound-producing organ at the base of the windpipe. During daytime singing, groups of RA neurons fire in tightly timed bursts. Particular patterns accompany particular moments in the song, helping to set the pressure of the breath and the tension of the tiny muscles that shape each sound. When the bird stops singing and goes to sleep, the syrinx becomes quiet. The RA neurons do not. Recordings from sleeping zebra finches have revealed spontaneous bursts whose timing and structure can resemble the activity seen when the same bird sings during the day. In early experiments, playing the bird's own song while it slept could evoke patterns in RA that matched patterns associated with daytime singing. Later work showed that spontaneous night activity also contains song-like sequences. The careful description is not that a perfect recording runs from the first note to the last every time. The sleeping circuit can produce fragments, compressed sequences, and variable combinations, and recent recordings suggest that the two hemispheres may replay related activity with far less coordination than they show during actual song. Sleep loosens the performance from the muscles and allows parts of the program to appear on their own. The beak remains closed. The song system runs without the song. The bird is silent. Its voice is not. This is the final return of the small animal that first entered the story as a learner. During its first appearance, it showed that a voice can arrive unfinished. During the second, it showed that the opportunity to build that voice closes early. Now it shows what the waking bird cannot show at all. Learning continues while the body is withdrawn from the world. A young finch may sing thousands of practice versions across a day, each one giving the hearing system a fresh sample of what the muscles produced. Then night interrupts the practice. The eyes close, the body becomes still, and activity inside the song circuit changes. Experiments with juveniles have found that hearing a tutor song during the day can alter the bursting of RA neurons during the following night. Those neural changes can appear before measurable changes emerge in the song the bird sings the next morning. The order matters. A sound enters through the ear. The sleeping brain changes. The waking voice follows. Researchers have also found that the song of a young bird can become temporarily less precise after sleep, especially during periods of rapid learning. Through intense morning practice, it regains structure and may then move closer to the tutor model. That result sounds at first like sleep has damaged the lesson. A different reading is more useful. The unstable young song may have been loosened so that it can change. A perfectly protected mistake would remain a mistake. The night appears to disturb the performance enough for the next day to rebuild it, although the exact role of replay and the reason for the morning deterioration are still being studied. Sleep may help preserve some patterns, reshape others, and alter the balance between stability and flexibility. The young bird wakes with work left to do. The work is slightly different because it slept. There is something gentle in the scale of this. The zebra finch weighs only around 12 grams, and its brief song is often repeated many times. Yet inside that small brain, the difference between one syllable and the next is represented by sequences precise enough to direct separate muscles on two sides of a divided vocal organ. During waking song, the left and right halves of the nervous system coordinate closely with breathing, so that the sequence emerges as one performance. During sleep, recordings suggest those halves can become more independent, each producing its own fragments of the motor pattern. The complete song belongs to the awake body. The sleeping brain is free to take it apart. That may be one reason sleep has become so valuable in studies of learned movement. When the bird is awake, neural activity is mixed with the act itself. Air moving, muscles contracting, sound returning through the ears, posture shifting on the perch. During sleep, much of that outward machinery is absent. What remains exposes the internal pattern more clearly. Researchers can see a motor program separated from the movement it normally causes, like finding the marks of a dance after the dancer has left the floor. This does not mean the finch dreams of singing in any form we could recognize. We do not know what, if anything, the bird experiences while these bursts occur. The evidence concerns cells and timing, not private images. It is enough that a learned behavior leaves an active trace during sleep, and that the trace changes with experience. The same general principle reaches into the human night, though the details are different and the comparison has to remain careful. Human speech is spread across larger networks concerned with hearing, movement, memory, and meaning. No single small nucleus contains a whole word in the way a simple diagram might suggest. Sleep also passes through several changing states, each with different rhythms and different relations to memory. Researchers studying new vocabulary, unfamiliar sound contrasts, and artificial grammatical patterns have repeatedly found that a period containing sleep can improve later retention or protect learning from decline. Although results vary with the task, the age of the learner and the kind of sleep measured, a newly learned word may become easier to retrieve after a night. An unfamiliar pattern of speech may become more stable. Connections between a new sound and older knowledge can strengthen after the learner stops practicing. That does not prove that the sleeping human brain recites each word in order. It shows that silence is part of learning. The mouth closes before the lesson is finished. Consider how much of your own language entered you under that rhythm. A child hears a new name during the day, mispronounces it, hears it again, then sleeps. The next day the sound returns through a mouth whose muscles have grown no stronger overnight. Yet the attempt may be slightly better placed. Across thousands of such nights, babble narrows into the speech of a household. Later, school adds words that appear once in a lesson and return more securely after sleep. An adult learning another language repeats a sound that feels physically wrong, rests, then discovers that the tongue reaches it more easily on a later day. Improvement is never guaranteed, and sleep cannot replace attention, exposure, or practice. It works on material that waking life has already supplied. The finch cannot sleep its way into a tutor song it never heard. A person cannot consolidate a word that never entered the ear. Night does not create the model. It gives the model time away from new interference. Your brain is doing some version of that now, though nobody could identify from outside which fragment of today is being strengthened, weakened, or connected to something older. Earlier conversations, names, and familiar voices enter a system that does not simply shut down when awareness fades. During sleep, human memory networks continue to change. Scientists often describe parts of this process as reactivation or replay, while warning that the evidence is less direct than the recordings taken from sleeping birds and that consolidation is not one single mechanism. The broad result remains. Sleep changes what survives from waking. Speech depends on this because speech is learned movement joined to learned sound and learned meaning. Every word has to be heard or encountered, stored, distinguished from neighbouring sounds, attached to an idea, and made available to the mouth. A waking brain can begin those operations. It does not necessarily finish them before bedtime. This is where the small sleeping bird comes closest to the person listening in the dark. Both bodies possess voices that were built socially. The finch required an adult tutor. You required people who repeated sounds until your hearing and mouth began to agree with them. Both voices needed daylight errors. Both also pass through hours when the outward instrument is mostly unused and the nervous system keeps working on what the day provided. The likeness should not be pushed further than the evidence allows. A finch song is a short courtship display that becomes highly fixed. Human language remains open, combinatorial, and tied to meanings that can change across a lifetime. The bird repeats a small inherited frame filled by one tutor. A person can use a finite set of sounds to produce a sentence nobody has heard before, yet the route into both abilities contains the same quiet fact. A learned voice needs time when it is not speaking. Near dawn, the zebra finch will begin to stir. Light reaching the eyes will shift the chemistry of the brain and body. The bird will lift its head, settle its feathers, and, after a period of waking, sing again. In a juvenile, the first songs of the morning may be rougher than those produced the previous evening. Repetition will draw them back into shape. In an adult, the pattern will usually be far more stable. Though microscopic changes in the participating neurons can continue while the audible song remains nearly the same, the system can change beneath a voice that appears stable. Something similar has been happening under your own speech for years. The voice you use now is recognizably yours, yet its neural support has altered with age, experience, illness, fatigue, and every new word you have added. You do not wake with a different language each morning because the system protects the pattern. You also do not wake with precisely the same brain. Tonight, while the throat rests, the networks that allow sound to become memory are not merely waiting for morning. They are part of what brings morning's voice back. The finch on the perch and the person in the bed are separated by hundreds of millions of years of evolutionary history, by different vocal organs and by entirely different limits on what a learned sound can carry. Still, both become quiet. In both, quiet is active. Tomorrow the bird will return to its few practice syllables. You will return to names, questions, memories, and sentences. Before either voice returns, sleep will have passed through the machinery that makes learning possible, leaving no sound in the room and changes that can only be heard later. Then another animal will wake nearby. one that has listened to the human voice for thousands of years, and the difference will no longer lie in whether it understands. It will lie in what human speech has already done to the life and brain of the listener. A dog asleep near a human bed is listening, even when it appears to have withdrawn from the room. One ear may turn toward a footstep in the hall. The breathing may stay slow while the muscles around the ear and head make a small correction toward a familiar voice. Say the dog's name in an ordinary tone and the body often changes before the eyes open fully. Say an unfamiliar word in the same tone and the response may be weaker. Change the tone while keeping the familiar word and something different happens again. The animal beside the bed has lived inside human sound for longer than any other domesticated species. It cannot build a sentence, yet its nervous system has been shaped by a world in which sentences are among the most important events that occur. Dogs and people have shared settlements, camps and sleeping places for at least about 14,000 years, and probably longer. Across that time, human beings did more than feed and breed another animal. They surrounded it with speech. A wolf pup in a den hears growls, whines, howls, and short barks tied to a limited range of situations. A dog pup in a house hears its name, commands, praise, warnings, questions, laughter, and arguments. It cannot know the grammar holding those sounds together. It still grows up where human vocal patterns predict what happens next. The difference can be heard in the sound dogs themselves make most readily. Adult wolves can bark, so barking was not invented by domestication. Their barks tend to be brief and are often associated with alarm, disturbance, or confrontation. Domestic dogs bark far more frequently and across a wider range of ordinary settings. Researchers do not agree on one simple reason this expansion happened. It may reflect changes linked with domestication and human selection. The result is clear enough without choosing a single cause. The signature vocalization of the domestic dog is a call its wolf relatives use much more sparingly. Human life did not give the dog words. It enlarged the place of sound in the dog's relationship with another species. Those barks are not all acoustically alike. Their spacing, pitch, and roughness vary with context, and playback studies show that human listeners can often sort barks from several familiar situations. The communication is imperfect, and no bark contains a sentence hidden inside it. Still, something has passed between species. The dog produces a call in a human household, and a human who cannot see the animal may infer something about the situation from the sound alone. The dog has not crossed into language. Human language has reached into the dog. Earlier tonight, the dog showed where speech stops. It could connect a spoken label with an object, and still lack the direct motor pathway required to reproduce the word. Now the same animal shows what speech does after it leaves the human mouth. It becomes part of the environment in which another brain develops. In one influential brain imaging study, trained dogs lay awake and unrestrained inside a scanner while hearing familiar praise words and neutral words spoken with praising or neutral intonation. The researchers reported a left-sided bias for meaningful words, a right auditory response to intonational differences, and the strongest reward response when a praising word arrived in a praising tone. Later work has complicated any neat claim that dogs process language exactly as people do, and no scan turns a dog into a silent human listener. The narrow result is enough. A dog's brain can separate more than one feature of a human utterance and combine those features with learned consequences. The air moves once across a room, and two species receive different things from it. The person hears a sentence. The dog hears a pattern built from familiarity, tone, timing, and history. Human speech has become biologically relevant to an animal that cannot speak. That is already unusual, yet it is still smaller than what the same moving air does between two people. Suppose someone in the next room says that a glass is broken in the kitchen. Before the sentence, nothing in your body is directed toward that glass. After it, you may know the object, the event, and the location without seeing any of them. The speaker's lungs compressed air, the vocal folds divided it into pulses, and the tongue and lips shaped the result. Those pressure changes traveled through a wall, moved the membrane in your ear by microscopic distances, and were converted into electrical activity. A few seconds later, the broken glass exists as an organized event in two nervous systems. No piece of glass crossed the room. No image had to be shown. The event moved as a pattern in air. Animal calls also move information. A crocodile hatchling can call from inside or near a nest, and the mother may respond. A bird can announce territory, and a dog can guide a person toward a hidden object. Human speech is not the only communication that matters, and treating every animal signal as a failed word would erase what those signals actually do. The difference lies in how far the system can leave the present and how freely its pieces can be recombined. A dog may bark because someone is outside. You can say that someone was outside yesterday, that nobody is outside now, that a person might arrive tomorrow, or that the sound came from a recording made years before the house was built. The mouth uses the same few dozen speech sounds to produce each version. The listener enters a relationship among times, people, causes, and possibilities. This is what the anatomical bargain has been approaching all night. A lowered and more open throat supplied a rich space for shaping vowels. The loss of vocal membranes and air sacs supplied a steadier source. Voluntary breath control stretched one exhalation into a planned sequence. Direct cortical access to the larynx allowed chosen sounds to arrive in chosen order. Vocal learning allowed each generation to fill the system from other mouths. None of those features alone is language. Together they created a physical channel capable of carrying combinations that are not fixed in advance. The human body can make a finite instrument behave without a practical endpoint. A person knows a limited vocabulary and a limited set of rules, yet can produce a sentence they have never produced before, and a listener can understand it on the first hearing. Researchers debate which aspects of this capacity are uniquely human and which have precursors elsewhere. Other animals can combine calls, learn sequences, refer to objects in limited tasks, and adjust communication to an audience. The evidence so far has not shown another species using an open-ended compositional vocal system with the range of human language. The distinction is one of scale and architecture, not a claim that every animal call is simple. Human speech keeps generating new structures because its units can be detached from one immediate state and placed into relationships with other units. This changes what a body can receive from another body. A cry tells you that pain is present. A sentence can tell you where the pain began, what caused it, how it changed, and what should be avoided next time. A growl can alter the behavior of everyone close enough to hear it. A spoken explanation can alter the behavior of someone who was absent when the danger occurred. The voice no longer only reveals the speaker. It can carry a model of part of the world. Once that became possible, knowledge no longer had to be rediscovered inside every lifetime. A child could be warned about a river before entering it. A hunter could describe an animal already beyond sight. These are reasonable consequences of language, though the archaeological record cannot reveal the first sentence or tell us exactly when fully modern speech emerged. Soft tissue rarely fossilizes, and behavior leaves indirect traces. The living mechanism shows what became possible, not the date on which someone first used it. The ability later escaped the limits of the living voice. Marks were placed on clay, bark, papyrus, and paper. Writing is not speech and appeared much later, but it stores language in a form another living body can return to sound. A person dead for 3,000 years cannot send breath into this room. Their arranged words can still guide the breath of a living reader. The air moves now. An old thought enters a new nervous system. This is where the exchange stops looking like a damaged throat with an impressive compensation. Choking, snoring, fragile neural control, and the loss of a long-distance call were real costs. What they helped make possible was larger than a better noise. One mind could leave part of its contents where another mind might find it. The passage is never perfect. Words can be vague, memories can be wrong, listeners can misunderstand, and no sentence transfers experience whole. Enough crosses. A name heard in the dark can bring back a face absent for decades. A warning from a stranger can change a person's route. A promise can direct actions toward a day that does not yet exist. Air leaves one person and becomes structure inside another. The dog near the bed has stood beside this exchange since long before writing. Human voices called dogs toward firelight, away from danger, toward prey, and back to camp. Selection and learning changed the animal's attention to hands, faces, and voices. Its barking expanded into the spaces of human life. It learned to wait for sounds it could not produce, and to act on distinctions it did not invent. A person speaks. The dog orients, remembers, and sometimes answers with a signal humans have become able to read. Speech shaped a listener outside the species that created it. Near the edge of a warm river, a crocodilian body offers a final measure of the distance. Crocodilians are among the most vocal living reptiles. Hatchlings call before or around hatching, siblings can influence one another's timing, and mothers respond to calls associated with small young. Adults bellow or roar in courtship and territorial settings, with acoustic features that can carry information about body size. These are not crude or useless sounds. They coordinate care, spacing, and reproduction in an animal line whose deeper Archosaur ancestry reaches far beyond the origin of mammals. We cannot know exactly what an extinct crocodilian sounded like, because sound does not fossilize, and it would be false to claim that a modern call has remained unchanged for millions of years. What can be said is quieter. The basic use of a laryngeal call tied closely to body size, immediate context, and inherited behavior is very old. A young crocodile does not need another crocodile to teach it the first call from the egg. It does not spend childhood filling an empty vocal instrument with thousands of borrowed symbols. Its voice performs the work its lineage requires, and then the repertoire closes around that work. The human throat followed a different path. It became less safe, less stable during sleep, and less powerful across distance. It also became teachable. A child receives sounds from people who receive them from others, and those sounds arrive carrying events the child never witnessed. By adulthood, the same throat can place the call of an ancient reptile, the bark of a dog, and the thought of a dead writer inside one sentence. The crocodile calls into the night and changes what nearby crocodiles do. You speak into the night and can change what a person believes happened before either of you was born. That is what the body received. The final question is no longer whether the price was real. It is how to look at the throat that paid it. Tonight, somewhere in a forest far from the room where you are lying, a chimpanzee may be asleep in a nest of bent branches. Its head rests forward, its jaw loose, its throat carrying air through a passage arranged more safely than yours. The larynx sits higher. The tongue does not turn so deeply into an open chamber above the airway. Food and breath are less likely to meet in the same exposed crossing. The soft walls of the throat do not have to be held apart in quite the same way through every sleeping hour. The animal will breathe, shift its weight, perhaps wake briefly at a sound and settle again. Nothing in that throat needs to prepare a sentence for morning. Here, another primate lies in the dark. Your own larynx is lower, your tongue fills more of the space behind the jaw, and every swallow still asks the airway to close for a moment. As sleep deepens, the muscles holding that passage open will relax. The arrangement is less secure. It is also the only arrangement on Earth known to have carried every kind of sentence a human being has ever spoken. The two throats began from related anatomy. Much of the material is the same: cartilage, muscle, membranes, nerves, air, and a tongue. Both can cough when the airway is disturbed. Both can release cries tied to pain, alarm, excitement, and play. Both can shape the pressure coming from the lungs into sounds recognized by others of their kind. The difference did not arrive as one new organ. There is no speech bone hidden inside the human neck, and no missing word-producing chamber inside the chimpanzee. The human line altered many ordinary parts, each by an amount that would have been useless without the others. The face shortened, the tongue curved down. The larynx changed position during development. Vocal membranes and large air sacs disappeared. Breathing came under finer voluntary control. Cortical pathways reached more directly toward the larynx. The ear and motor system became able to copy unfamiliar sounds. Childhood stayed open long enough for another person's voice to build a system inside the child. Sleep helped stabilize what waking practice had begun. None of these changes explain speech alone. The voice exists in their meeting. That is why every animal encountered tonight could hold one piece and still stop short. The red deer lowered its larynx and did not speak. The orangutan carried a powerful voice across forest and did not speak. The zebra finch learned a tutor's sounds, babbled, practiced and replayed parts of its song during sleep, yet did not open its system into unlimited meanings. The dog recognized labels and separated features of the human voice but could not return a word. A seal, an elephant, a whale, and a parrot moved surprisingly close to human sound using different anatomy, then remained alone at the edge of imitation. The chimpanzee stood closest in ancestry, and perhaps made the distance feel largest. It had lungs, lips, a tongue, a social life, memory, intention, and a brain capable of difficult learning. The absence of speech could not be placed in one missing piece. It lay in the way the whole body had been organized. Your body carries that organization even in silence. The throat is doing no visible work now, yet its shape remains open to the risk that came with it. The recurrent laryngeal nerve still loops through the chest and returns toward the voice box. The motor pathways that allow a whisper or a carefully held note are still vulnerable to injury. The older emotional voice remains underneath them, ready to cry out before language can choose a word. The mouth keeps the resting posture left by the language learned in childhood. The ear has already discarded some distinctions that were not needed in the first language surrounding it. Every part of the system bears evidence of a history that did not begin with you. You inherited a throat already changed, then other people completed it. Before you understood a word, voices were entering. A parent, relative, or caregiver repeated names, changed pitch, slowed syllables, and waited for an answer. You heard sounds thousands of times before your mouth could place them correctly. You made mistakes that nobody recorded because mistakes were the ordinary route. The tongue moved too far forward, the lips closed at the wrong moment, the breath ended before the syllable did. Night followed day, and the attempts gradually became less uncertain. No single morning marked the arrival of speech. One day, however, a sound left you and another person recognized what you intended. Air had carried something from one nervous system to another, and your body had entered the exchange that surrounds nearly every human life. From there, the system grew faster than conscious memory could follow. Words attached themselves to faces, rooms, food, absence, comfort, and danger. Grammar formed without anyone explaining most of its rules. The muscles of the mouth learned to move through 10 or more sound segments in a second. Breath began to anticipate the length of a sentence before the sentence began. The voice learned when to rise, when to soften, when to hide strain, and when strain would escape. By adulthood, all of this felt less like a biological achievement than a normal way of being awake. That feeling hides the cost, because the ability is used too often to appear unusual. You speak to ask for a door to be opened. You speak to say that you are tired. You speak to correct a small misunderstanding that would not matter tomorrow. The throat that surrendered a kilometre-long call, a safer crossing, and some stability during sleep is used for ordinary sentences most of the time. That does not make the bargain small. It shows how completely the bargain changed the environment in which a human body lives. A chimpanzee wakes into a world where calls remain closely connected to immediate situations. A person wakes into a world already filled with descriptions of things that are absent. Weather forecasts refer to a sky that has not arrived. A message carries the plans of someone in another city. A book preserves choices made by a person whose body disappeared centuries ago. A child hears about an animal it has never seen and forms a mental image before meeting one. Human life is surrounded by realities delivered through language before direct experience begins. The body does not merely use speech inside the world. Speech helps construct the world the body believes it inhabits. This ability is never guaranteed truth. The same channel that carries knowledge can carry error. A sentence may preserve an observation or preserve a mistake. A voice may warn, teach, and comfort, or mislead, threaten, and divide. Language does not make human beings wise simply by existing. It makes one person's thought available to another, and the value of what crosses depends on what was formed before the breath began. That is part of the responsibility contained in the anatomy. A dangerous throat was not exchanged for automatic understanding. It was exchanged for the possibility of understanding which still has to be used with care. The listener has a part in the system too. Speech seems to belong to the mouth because the mouth is what moves, but a conversation exists only when another brain receives and interprets the movement in the air. The zebra finch required a tutor. The human infant required people. The dog's attention to human words developed inside a shared social environment. No learned voice is an individual possession in the beginning. The sounds in your mouth came from other mouths. Even the private words used in silent thought were provided by people outside you. What feels most inward has a social origin. This may be the deepest return on the physical cost. The body became permeable to other minds. Something another person learned could enter you without the event being repeated. Something you know can leave you without being lost. The transfer is incomplete, but it can continue after the speaker is gone. A person can die and leave a sequence of words that changes the breathing, decisions, or attention of someone not yet born at the time those words were arranged. No roar travelling through forest has that kind of reach. Its distance is not measured in meters, it is measured in lives. Beside that, the human voice remains physically modest. It is easy to drown out. Wind carries it away. A wall weakens it. A damaged nerve can reduce it to breath. Fatigue roughens it. Fear narrows it. Age changes the tissues and alters the pitch. The instrument that carries thought is made of wet, soft structures suspended in the neck, not of anything permanent. Every spoken sentence disappears almost as soon as it arrives. The sound wave passes and the room becomes quiet again. What remains is whatever changed in the listener. The fragility is part of the mechanism rather than an exception to it. A word has no material weight, yet it can alter the movement of a body hours later. A name lasts less than a second in the air, yet it can return a person to memory after decades. A promise is vibration followed by silence, and people may organize years around it. The throat does not hold these consequences. It only opens the passage through which they begin. Somewhere in the forest, the sleeping chimpanzee carries no less a body because it does not speak. Its throat fits the life its lineage continued to live. It can climb, feed, call, breathe and swallow with an arrangement that did not enter the same chain of risks. Evolution does not place species on a ladder with speech at the top. Every living animal is the continuation of a route that was workable enough to remain. The chimpanzee did not fail to become human. Its throat kept capacities that the human throat reduced or lost. It can produce calls with rough power. Its airway remains differently protected. The comparison matters because it prevents the human body from being treated as a finished improvement. The speaking throat is a compromise. It is powerful in one direction and exposed in others. That has been the pattern through the entire night. A gain arrived beside a loss. Control arrived beside fragility. Learning arrived beside dependence. An open system arrived beside the possibility of confusion. The body did not solve communication without cost. It accepted a set of costs and made something from them. You are inside that compromise now. Your breathing is quiet. The folds in the larynx are apart, allowing air to pass without producing tone. The tongue is resting in the posture shaped by the language around your childhood. The muscles that could form a sentence are still. The older pathway that could release a laugh, gasp, or cry is still available beneath them. Memory networks are moving through the changes of sleep, or preparing to do so. Nothing has to be spoken for the whole history to remain present. The shape of the throat holds it. The next time you wake and say another person's name, the act will appear effortless. Air will rise from the lungs. 2 small folds will interrupt it. The pressure pulses will enter the throat and mouth. The tongue will move through a pattern learned years earlier. The sound will cross the space between 2 bodies. Somewhere inside the listener, that pattern will become a person. This is what the unsafe crossing made possible. This is what the loss of the old membranes made possible. This is what the freed breath, the delicate nerve roots, the years of babbling and the silent nights of learning made possible. The throat turned breath into a name. There is no need to decide that every price was worth paying, as though evolution had offered a choice to someone who could accept or refuse it. No ancestor saw the full bargain. No body agreed in advance. Small changes persisted because they worked within particular lives, and much later their consequences met inside a species able to ask how they had arrived. That question itself is part of the result. A chimpanzee can live the difference. Only a person can lie awake and consider it. Before morning, the 2 throats will remain quiet. One is safer in several ways and carries a voice closely tied to the moment. The other is more exposed and can turn the past, the absent and the possible into patterns another mind may receive. Neither arrangement was planned. Both are alive tonight. Your throat is the one that can name the other, name itself, and then ask the question that the body has spent the whole night approaching without ever fully answering. Why can humans speak?